The courtroom was already tense before she walked in, but when Evelyn Carter stepped through those tall oak doors, silence fell like a wave. The judge stopped mid-sentence. The bailiff froze. Even her parents, Robert and Margaret Carter, stared like they were seeing a ghost. Her father's lips curled in that familiar half-laugh, the one he used when he wanted to remind her she'd never be good enough. Her mother adjusted her pearls and sighed, the way only someone does when disappointment is second nature. And yet, for the first time in her life, they had no words, because Evelyn wasn't the same daughter who left home years ago. She was Commander Evelyn Carter, United States Navy. Evelyn had been out front trimming the azaleas, one of those quiet chores she used to keep her mind from wandering too far, when she saw the envelope, thick paper, official seal, Portsmouth Family Court. At first, she thought it was some clerical mistake, but when she opened it and saw the words Carter v. Carter, her hands went cold. Her parents were suing her for ownership of the family home, the house her late grandfather had left to her, the house she had quietly maintained for years, paying taxes, repairing the roof, replacing the old shutters, alone. She let out a low, bitter laugh. They finally found a new way to talk to me, she murmured to her dog, a graying German shepherd named Knox. He rested his head on her knee, eyes full of that wordless loyalty no human had ever given her. It had been 12 years since she last stood in that house, 12 years since the night her father accused her of abandoning the family when she enlisted. She could still hear his voice, sharp and angry. "You're walking away from everything we built for you," and her own calm reply, "No, Dad, I'm walking towards something I believe in." That night, he turned his back on her. Her mother didn't say a word. Evelyn went on to serve, quietly, earning medals, leading operations, saving lives. Not a hero in headlines, but a leader who made sure her people made it home. Then one day, a roadside blast ended her career and left her with a rebuilt knee and a limp that never quite faded. She came home to Virginia with a chest full of ribbons, a pension, and silence from her family. That night, she opened the old steel Navy chest she hadn't touched in years. Inside lay her dress blues, pressed and immaculate, the same uniform she'd worn at her best friend's funeral, the friend who never made it home. Her fingers trembled slightly as she held the jacket up to the light. Knox watched her quietly, tail thumping once. "They'll finally see who I became," she whispered. The courthouse looked smaller now. The red bricks faded by years of storms and time. As she walked in, even the janitor paused mid-sweep. His gaze caught the glint of the ribbons on her chest. "Morning, ma'am," he said softly, almost reverently. "Morning," Evelyn replied with a calm nod. Inside, the clerk called out, "Case 4238B, Carter versus Carter." Evelyn stood. Her limp was slight, but the discipline in her stride was unmistakable. Her parents sat on the opposite side. Robert looked older, but still carried that rigid pride. Margaret looked flawless as ever, hiding judgment behind her pearls. When the judge entered, he nearly faltered mid-step as his eyes landed on Evelyn's uniform. "Commander Carter," he said slowly, reading her title aloud. Her father blinked. "Commander," he muttered under his breath, confused. Evelyn rose calmly. "Yes, Your Honor." Her voice was steady, measured, the tone of someone used to briefing admirals, not pleading for fairness. She handed over a neat folder inside. Every receipt, tax record, and maintenance invoice proving she had kept the house alive all these years. The judge nodded. "Thank you, Commander." Robert couldn't hold his tongue. "You think wearing that uniform makes you right?" he barked. The judge's gavel struck once. "Mr. Carter, that's enough." Evelyn didn't flinch. "Sir," she said quietly, eyes on the bench, "I didn't wear this to prove I'm right. I wore it because it represents everything I've stood for since the day my parents stopped believing in me." As she spoke, the courtroom shifted. Even strangers could feel it. The weight of a life lived in service, in silence, in duty. Then, unexpectedly, the the judge asked. "Commander, are you the same Evelyn Carter recognized for leading the Yemen evacuation in 2019? A murmur ran through the room. Robert looked utterly lost. "Evacuation? What is he talking about?" Evelyn nodded once. "Yes, sir." The judge's voice softened. "Then allow me to thank you for what you did that day." The silence that followed was deeper than before. Even her father's anger evaporated, replaced by something else, something almost like shame. When the session ended, the judge promised to deliver his decision soon, but Evelyn already knew the house and her peace were finally hers. Weeks later, autumn arrived. The farmhouse stood tall again, paint renewed, porch repaired, flag waving proudly in the cool Virginia wind. Every nail she hammered back, every board she replaced was more than repair. It was healing. That evening, headlights pulled into the driveway. Her parents stepped out, followed by her brother Ryan. They shared dinner on the porch. Quiet, awkward, but civil. The kind of peace families make when they finally run out of reasons to fight. At one point, Robert lifted his glass and said quietly, "To the one who finally made us proud." Evelyn smiled gently. "To the ones who taught me what pride really costs," she replied. No anger, no victory dance, just truth. 3 days after Flight 217 mysteriously reappeared on radar, the recovery team reached the crash site, or what they thought was the crash site. Snow blanketed the peaks like a shroud. The fuselage lay half-buried, torn clean in two, but what chilled rescuers wasn't the wreck itself. It was the silence. No birds, no wind, no echo. Just the crunch of boots on frozen earth and the faint, rhythmic beeping of a black box transmitter. When Captain Hayes pried open the cockpit door, the seats were empty. No bodies, no blood, just frost covering every surface, including the inside of the windshield, as if the cold had come from within. The flight data recorder was still humming, its final timestamp frozen at 2:47 a.m., the same minute the plane vanished from radar. Hayes radioed base. "Command, we've located the fuselage, but there's no sign of the crew." Static hissed. Then a voice crackled back. But it wasn't command. The signal died instantly. The team stared at one another. No one spoke. The mountains around them suddenly felt alive, listening. Night fell fast. Temperatures plunged below -20 degrees Celsius. They set up camp beside the wreck, waiting for extraction. But one by one, the team began hearing things. Faint footsteps outside, whispering that circled the tents like a predator in the dark. At 2:47 a.m., exactly 24 hours after finding the wreck, the emergency beacon switched on by itself. The same voice came through again, this time clearer. Hayes stumbled out of his tent and looked up. High above the ridge, a shape cut through the clouds, the blinking lights of a plane gliding silently across the night sky. He raised his flare gun, heart pounding. The others ran out just in time to see the impossible. The plane bore the same tail number, Flight 217, but the wreck was still lying right beside them. The apparition crossed the valley and disappeared into the storm, leaving behind a low hum that vibrated through the snow like an echo of engines from another world. When morning came, the rescue team found their radio logs erased. The black box gone. Only one recording remained on Hayes's personal cam, 7 seconds long. It showed the inside of the cockpit, instruments flickering and a co-pilot turning toward the camera with frost covering his eyes. Then, nothing. When Captain Hayes returned from the mountains, he wasn't the same man. He didn't talk about what happened. He didn't sleep either. The recovery team had been grounded indefinitely. 2 members quit the very next day. One of them, Sergeant Miller, swore he could still hear the engines at night, even though they'd been hundreds of miles from any flight path. At first, everyone thought it was stress, until Miller vanished. His truck was found on a mountain road, engine running, doors open. Inside, his radio was tuned to an aviation frequency, and through the static, investigators heard a faint transmission. "This is Flight 217, requesting descent clearance. Please respond." The voice was calm, professional. but Flight 217 had been missing for 12 years. The case was quietly classified, but Hayes couldn't let it go. He got access to Miller's radio logs and drove back into the Rockies, to the exact coordinates where the signal was received. By midnight, snow started falling again. He turned on his transceiver and scanned every frequency. Nothing, just white noise. Then, at exactly 2:47 a.m., his headset crackled. Altitude stable, passengers asleep, turbulence ahead. It was the same voice, Captain Reynolds, the original pilot of Flight 217. Hayes froze. He knew that voice. He'd heard it hundreds of times in old training recordings. He spoke back. "Captain Reynolds, this is Captain Hayes. Do you copy?" A pause. Then, "We never landed, Hayes. We're still in the air." The radio emitted a high-pitched scream. Not human, not mechanical, something in between. The dials on the dashboard spun wildly. The outside temperature dropped 20 degrees in seconds, and through the windshield, Hayes saw lights forming in the fog, the unmistakable outline of a commercial jet slowly descending toward the valley. He stepped out into the snow as the shadow of the plane passed overhead. No sound, no wind, just the shimmer of frost trailing its wings. Then, for a brief moment, he saw faces in the cabin windows, pale, motionless, watching him. He raised his radio one last time. "Reynolds, what do you want?" The reply came like a whisper behind him, not through the headset, but from the air itself. "To land." A blinding flash engulfed the valley, and when the rescue chopper arrived at dawn, there was no trace of Hayes. Only his transceiver remained, frozen to the ground, still transmitting the same looped message. "Flight 217 requesting descent clearance. Please respond." After Captain Hayes vanished, the investigation was taken over by a special aviation task force, one that didn't officially exist. They called themselves Unit Echo. Their first move was simple: retrieve every file related to Flight 217, including something most people had forgotten even existed: the original passenger manifest. But when Agent Larkin opened the sealed envelope, he froze. The list had 216 names. That wasn't unusual. What was unusual was the final name handwritten at the bottom: Captain Colton Hayes. Larkin read it twice. It made no sense. Hayes was the rescuer, not a passenger, and the date beside his name was the exact date he disappeared. He searched every digital archive, every database. In all official records of Flight 217 from 12 years ago, Hayes's name had never been there. But the manifest they'd retrieved from evidence wasn't digital. It was printed, ink faded, paper yellowed, like it had aged naturally over a decade. Yet the signature beside Hayes's name was unmistakable, his own. Later that night, Larkin was reviewing cockpit audio from the original flight when he heard something he'd missed before. At the 1:13:40 mark, the co-pilot muttered, "Captain Hayes will meet us after the descent." But Hayes had never met them. He wasn't part of the airline. He wasn't even in aviation yet. Larkin replayed the audio again. Same voice, same sentence, same name. He checked the timestamp against radar logs. Flight 217 hadn't reported descent at that time. They were cruising at 35,000 feet. So who were they talking about? On the third night of the investigation, the security cameras in the evidence storage triggered. Something moved between the shelves. Something tall, thin, frost trailing behind it like smoke. The lights flickered. Then a figure appeared on the feed, blurred, shivering, and staring directly into the camera. Larkin recognized the uniform instantly. A rescue parka, cold weather gear, Captain Hayes. He wasn't breathing. He wasn't blinking. He just whispered two words, barely audible, distorted, like they were coming from underwater, not passengers. The feed cut out. The next morning, the task force entered the storage room. The air was so cold, their breath crystallized. They found the shelf where Hayes had appeared. The manifest lay open on the floor. The ink had changed again. Now more names were added. Names of people who had investigated the crash. People who had searched the mountains. names, people who had heard the transmissions. Every name was crossed out, except one, Agent Daniel Larkin. Under his name, a note had appeared in the same handwriting as before. Larkin stepped back, heart hammering, and that's when he heard it, a low, distant hum, slowly growing louder, vibrating through the concrete floor, the unmistakable sound of approaching engines, a plane, coming in for landing, but they were miles from any airfield. Agent Larkin froze as the low hum grew louder, vibrating through the floors, the walls, even the lights overhead. The sound was wrong. It didn't echo like a real aircraft. It pulsed like it was alive. The other investigators rushed into the corridor. Is that? Larkin nodded. Engines, but not from this world. They moved to the loading bay where the sound was strongest. The metal shutters trembled with each wave of the approaching roar. Then, boom, a blast of icy wind blew through the seams, frosting the walls in seconds. A shadow passed over the roof, a huge one. The shutters rattled, bolts snapped one by one, clinking across the concrete, and then silence. Total, suffocating silence. A single red light blinked outside in the fog landing gear. The metal door finally buckled and collapsed inward. Snow rushed across the floor like a living river. A ramp extended from the fog, not attached to anything visible, just a long, frost-covered walkway fading into white. At the end of the ramp stood a figure, tall, thin, head tilted like a broken doll. Captain Hayes. His skin was pale blue, frost crystallizing around his eyes. His breath came out in clouds of white steam, but it wasn't cold breath, it was fog, the same fog surrounding the Phantom aircraft. He raised a shaking hand toward Larkin. You're on the manifest. Board the plane.